after 45 minutes.
I think you can have up to 4 people for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a lot of fewer bells and whistles, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've only got the basic one. There's really cool. Do you have Zoom?
I use it. I use a bunch of different things. I work in technology, so but I use Zoom on a fairly regular basis.
I've noticed with a higher paying one, you can actually go Facebook Live and record, like connect Facebook Live to Zoom, but we don't have
Right.
that one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're just getting started, man. So welcome to the first ever happy hour, which, as Tony pointed out, seems to say a lot more about me than anything else. So yeah, I'm happy, Tony. That's what it points out.
Yes. Yes.
So this is going to be a time, and we're going to rotate. So one Tuesday I'm mornings, the following Tuesday I'm evenings. And actually Donna's the opposite rotation as I am.
I'm actually a Tuesday evening and then a Thursday morning.
So that is up and available for people. And it's going to be a chance for people to ask any craft questions that they have, troubleshoot manuscript problems, all those kinds of things. And we're hoping to kind of grow it into a useful resource for people.
Okay.
So, Tony, you're working on a manuscript. Where is it? What's happening?
It is. So I've redone the opening, the Boston opening.
Okay.
And I've streamlined it, and I've removed the cell phone stealing, and Eileen's read my manuscript, so and so I actually want to send you that first chapter just to have you have a review of it.
I'd like to take a peek. Yeah, actually. How do you think it's working? Like, what do you think made the difference?
Well, it's your guidance has made the difference. No, and it's yeah, it was too much. I was too much going into the principal Rupert is sort of like another story about him there. So I tried to streamline that, and I moved it to he finds out right away that that they're moving, almost like after the first kind of a couple of pages. They find out that he moves, and then he goes and then sort of gets payback on the bully and on the principal, and then they move. So that's a much shorter version.
And I think that's fairly common. I know for myself, I often have to write my way into a manuscript.
Yeah,
so my first draft of something is actually figuring out where does the story get started.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we feel like we need a lot of backstory, that it's not going to make sense.
Right.
But it actually does. And in fact, I'm going to do my masterclass, which is in February, is actually going to be all on backstory. So what is it you need to know about your characters, and then how do you kind of weave that in? And I think a big part of it is actually, to some degree, what you're doing is you may have to write it. You may have to write those chapters to cut them out eventually, which is frustrating at times.
Yeah. The other thing I found, and this is more of a technical thing, is so I've been using Scrivener, and I just downloaded I signed up for the trial for Pro Writing Aid. Have you seen that?
No, can you tell me a little bit about it?
It's an add-in. It's like I think it's like $140 for life. You can get like a lifetime subscription, or you can pay for it on a monthly subscription. But it does, grammar, style, finds all your, it's sort of a, Word on steroids. But the nice thing is that it actually supports Scrivener. So there's a Pro Writing Aid application that you launch, and then you can open up your Scrivener file within the application, so that I can make all my changes, and then it saves it back into Scrivener. I can open up in Scrivener to do the regular work. So and it was fun. I was using it to kind of go through and find my bad writing, which there's lots of it, but to try and sort of hone that a little bit more.
You're not alone in that. So is it sort of the grammar Nazi on speed? Was that?
Yeah, let me show it to you. I can Pro Writing Aid. Let me share my screen.
I'm so impressed with your technical abilities.
Okay, so So this is my manuscript, right, that I've
Yeah.
opened up. And I just basically went, open up file, and it says open, is it Scrivener or what it is? And I said, I pointed it at the Scrivener index file, and then it opens it all up. And so it doesn't quite look like Scrivener, but it's the same document.
Yeah.
And so I do a summary, and I haven't really played with this too much, but it goes through and does a summary. I can look at overused words. I can look at cliches.
Nice.
And so I was using it to go through these. It actually keeps all the same colors too of these. Of
your sticky note things.
Because I use with Scrivener, I use they have it as a label, what they call a label, but I use it a different color to show me where I'm at, whether I've edited it or not.
Okay.
Okay, now you can do this. Take forever to do the summary.
So this will be something actually we'll check out, because one of the things we're trying to do is have lists for people of different resources. So this would be something I think would be really interesting.
Yeah. So this is, let me actually go into the, so if I go style, it's telling me, there's a one word, passive word found. And then what I can do is I can go right to the word, and it tells me, and then it gives me a little bit of a, try and make it more direct.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Anything overused.
I'm like, I gotta have this.
Yeah.
Any cliche, I'm okay, there's no cliches. I haven't looked at this other stuff. Diction, vague abstract words. So it's, what I found is, and I've gone through it a bit the other day with this particular, this sort of new opening.
Yeah.
It found some things I'm going, it's my writing, but I go, yeah, okay, if I delete that word or change the word, it makes it, does make it sharper. So
that's really nice, because I certainly think that's, for me, having just gone through my second round of revisions, that's the stuff that I'm, catching sometimes. Like I catch some of it the first time, some of it the second time, some of it the third time, sometimes, fourth or fifth time, you're still finding that stuff.
Right.
But if something's going to do it for me,
right,
I kind of like that.
Yeah, and just and it's because I can't, the forest and the trees problem, right? So
well, and I think one of the things that's really important to know about editing in general is it's really hard to see in your own work.
Right.
I see it in other people's work, and I, can get out my red pen and do all kinds of things. But when I'm looking at my own, I don't necessarily see it.
Yes, funny how that is.
Yeah, funny as that is.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I'm going to segue into, one person had sent in a question for me saying they wanted to know, how do you know when you're done with a manuscript? Like, how do you know when it's ready to send off?
To abandon. Yeah.
Not abandon. How do you know when you're ready to query? Tony, you've been through this. How do you know when you're finally ready to go?
I've had some readers read it.
Yeah.
Right. That are not related to me. That like having you edit the ballet novel, a year ago or 2 years ago, was very helpful, because I was going through it with your edits. I'm going, oh crap. There's that. I thought I forgot about that, or I'd hoped that'd go away, or because you looked at it with fresh eyes, and I was giving you money, so that both helped. And so that was very helpful to kind of go through that, and even going back and forth on it, right? But it's just it's the last 5%, right? It's the last mile that is just the hardest to go through.
I think so. Donna, do you want to weigh in? Like, do you have a way that you're done?
Here, I can make myself come back again. It was exactly the same. I mean, Tony was singing my song, as it were. You were my development editor, and once I got through them all, and once you had told me that I needed to take out 10,000 fabulous words and then write 30,000 new words, that gave me a story that I was happy to share with beta readers and critique partners. And once the critique partners had to go at it, then I felt like I was ready. And you know what, for me though, when I knew I was ready to actually publish was after I had started submitting to contests and got that external validation that in fact this story was good enough to get an award. And but I needed that external validation. So your feedback was the first piece of knowing it was ready to share with the next level, and then getting them to give me feedback was to the next. But that external validation for me was pretty important.
I think it's actually huge for a lot of people to have something. And I think that's why a lot of people pay for a developmental editor, is because they're looking for that external. I mean, certainly I tell people the first thing you need to do is to get some distance from it. Because one of two things happen when you finish a manuscript. You either finish it and think, this is absolutely genius.
Yes.
Or it's like,
yeah, or it's total crap. Like there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground. People either tend to be one or the other, probably depending on your own confidence levels. You're either like, this is the best thing that has ever happened, or you are convinced you should never write again. So you need just a little bit of distance for even just that first round of edits. And then you do need to get outside eyes on it. And those should be trusted readers, people that are going to maybe go a little easy on you sometimes that first round, depending how ready you are for feedback, because that can be hard to hear. And trusted in terms of knowing, does this person know how to give feedback? And I think we're going to end up doing a whole workshop at some point on critique groups and how to run a critique group and who to have in your critique group and all of those kinds of things. But that can be huge. My second round is to get a knowledgeable reader. And that can be a developmental editor. That can be contests, something where you're getting something where it's someone who's maybe a bit more objective. Because anytime you're getting friends or family to weigh in, there's just that weight that goes with it. And then for me, one is understanding that you may never be done. So, I get a book to where I think it is absolutely done, and I send it to my agent, and then she clarifies for me that I'm in fact not done. And then I do a round of edits, and then we goes to my editor, and I think this is as good as it's ever going to be. And then my editor clarifies for me, no, that's not in fact the case. And we do another round of edits. And in fact, this last book that I just turned in, we did 2 rounds of edits. So I turned in the first round to my editor, and she came back and she said, totally, we can go to print, but I think we could turn this up one more notch if you did this thing, which she had no idea how to do. And I didn't either. And, but as soon as she said it, it was that thing like, that will actually...
Was that like a plot change?
It was a plot change.
Yeah.
It was, if there was a way to basically, I don't want to say there was a coincidence because I try really hard not to rely on coincidence, but there definitely was an element that was maybe a little bit easier. So she was like, if you can find a way to bring this back in and solve it in a completely different way, it will take this to a different level. Which was really great advice, but I seriously hated her for that advice for a period of time. Because I said, well, do you have any idea how to do that? Like, because I, tried several things before I came up with what I did. And she's like, oh, I don't have any idea. So she actually took it to an editorial meeting at HMH and said, this is what's going on in the book. Does anyone have any ideas? And everyone's like, yeah, no, but yeah, if she could do something else, that would be great. Yeah. So finally, it came to me in a flurry of, I don't know, bourbon and bad decisions.
I found the process of the synopsis very helpful, right? Because the gravity boots thing that I'm working on right now. So I did that was a nano book, right? And then I went through and cleaned up to get to a first draft. And I think I sent you the initial synopsis of the first draft, and I went through to the second draft, getting it out as good, and that's what I sent you. And then going back and forth, because it's basically the architecture of the book is what I'm trying to get right.
And that's the age-old battle, right, between plotters and pansters, and people who love to plot and have everything outlined, and people who can't stand it. Yeah. I think the one thing to understand is I've become a plotter. I was a pantster to start. And that's just how I wrote. And then I had to kind of write my way free of that. And that works for a lot of people, But for me, I found, similar to you, that taking time before I write to sort of figure out, as you called it, the architecture or the sort of the structure of the book was helpful for me for two reasons. First is it gave me no excuse not to write. So when I sit down at the computer and I have blocked off, I'm going to write for 2 or 3 hours this afternoon. When I was pansting, sometimes I would be like, oh, what is it today? And I don't know. And maybe I need to think about this thing. Whereas when I have an outline, it's like, well, this is the scene that comes up next. I need to write the scene where she's on the flight. So I have fewer excuses not to be writing. And secondly, it allows me to kind of see the bones of the book. But that in no way means that I feel married to it. Like if you looked at the book that I just turned in, I actually went back to my original outline and just had a laugh because how the crime is solved is completely different. Who some of the main characters are completely changed. And so about maybe 3/4 of the way through the first draft, I started to rewrite the synopsis. And then when I went back through the first version, then I could see where there were problems in a way I couldn't see before. So I think one thing that can get people stuck is the idea that, oh, if I have an outline, then that's the outline and I have to stick to it. And you don't.
I do like this sort of chipping away at the marble, I guess, right? Is because again, the first synopsis went through it, I wrote it, sent it back, then sent you I worked on the other one, and so that's what I'm going on, and I think that's a much better story if I can deliver it. But I think I did most of the nano book. I think I might have done like a page rough outline, but it was really rough, so it's sort of interesting to go back and forth on that.
Yeah, I find it really helpful, but I think it's, for people who may dial in. Donna, are you a pantser?
Total pantser. And I wanted to ask you how I've twice written detailed outlines. And by the time I got through the outline, I was like, okay, that's done. And maybe that's good. Maybe that just saved me 6 months of writing because the story ultimately didn't engage me enough to finish it again and again and again. But so you used to be a pantser. How long did it take you to develop this skill, or was it having that external, the external influence to make you do it?
Well, I want to sound like I'm very bespoke and just aware, but the honest truth is I became an outliner because after my second book that I had published, the publisher came back to me and said, we really like you. We'd actually be willing to sign you on for your next book if you turn in an outline. So the idea that they would give me the idea that somebody would cut me a check was a huge motivator to, master that outlining.
Now, wait, is this in your recent iteration of writing or from the back at the beginning? Because you've published 15 books, right?
Yeah. This was after I wrote, so both Unpredictable, which was my first novel.
Yeah.
Then I actually wrote a novel called Do or Die, which I published much later as an indie book because the publisher ended up folding and not wanting anything that was a romantic comedy. So that just went off to the side. So both of those were pantsed. And I then pantsed my first YA book, which was What Would Emma Do? Total pantsed. And then when I turned it in, and, the publisher came back and I had an idea, like I knew kind of the beginnings of what I wanted to do, which was getting revenge on Lauren Wood, but it was very vague. What did make that easier is I knew I wanted to do kind of a modern retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo. So when they came back to me and they said, we love your book, we'd be happy to sign your option book right now, money on the table, if you just turn in a 2 to 3 page outline and maybe the first 5 or 10 pages. So I was like, if you want to give me $30K, I can come up with a few pages, all right, and give me some time. So to some degree that was easier because I actually went on to Spark Notes, the old Cliff Notes, and downloaded the outline for the Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, that's funny. I am not telling anybody that.
I downloaded that outline and I started with that. And I was like, okay, if this is a main plot point in the Count of Monte Cristo, what would that be in my book? And I kind of went through and did that as my setup.
Yeah.
And then wrote the kind of first 5 or 10 pages. And then again, the outline totally changed.
Right.
And if people are concerned about that, publishers don't care. unless you're solely like, it was going to be a murder mystery and now I decided I'm writing a paranormal romance. That's what they would care about. But generally they expect that your book is going to change from the outline.
Yeah.
And in some cases they will weigh in. So my current publisher, they don't ask for a full outline. In fact, they'll just take a paragraph from me, which is stupid, but they'll weigh in on the paragraph and sort of say, oh, I don't know about this. And it gets me thinking. So I do think even if you're a pantster and you don't like the process of doing an outline, there may be some benefit to sitting down across from a friend and sort of saying, this is what the book is about. This is what excites me about the book. This is what I'm thinking. Just because people will start saying like, well, why would this happen? Well, why would that happen? I'm starting right now just the process. I want to start an adult novel, an adult thriller. And I called a friend and she said, oh, that sounds fascinating. And I'm like, oh, it's all about, this person who's a catfisher. So she's, enticing these certain people and this happens and that happens. And she asked this very basic question like, well, but why would that woman be in on a car with that guy? And I was like,
shut up.
I don't know. I don't know.
Don't ask me that question.
But, I wrote down the question and I realized like, okay, that's something like, because there's a major plot point where she's involved in a car accident with another character. And it's like, but they have no reason to be in the same space at this point. So for me, I find it easier to troubleshoot that in an outline stage. One of the resources I can find and just list maybe in River is a website that you can go to that outlines almost every major movie you can think of.
Fun.
Which is really fun to sort of go and look at. And two, I think if you're not an outliner, looking at outlines of stories that helps you to start seeing the bones and the structure of it. And then you can take something, which is such a natural segue. So the other question I got, which was, what are some of your favorite craft books? And one of them is The Writer's Journey.
Christopher Vogler.
Got that one.
Nicely highlighted and everything for myself. But I really like film structure as a way of understanding. So Save the Cat is another one of my favorites. Michael Haig's 6-plot story structure is one that I use all the time when I'm teaching because I think it's really manageable. But starting to look at like, what are those major beats in a story? And even if you don't want to have an outline where you are, this happens and this happens and that happens, because I think for some people, like you were saying, Donna, it just sucks the joy out of writing for them.
Do you know what? And I don't know if it's appropriate to share, but the way I have, and the other thing with my writing is, and I mean, this is 25 years of, I guess, doing the kind of work I do. I don't write in a straight line at all. I'm so iterative. So I'm writing, like this. And I use Scrivener, and I've had Scrivener since, I guess, about 10 years, since it first came out. And what I've done is I've taken resources like the Vogler book and script writing, and I've created within Scrivener a template so that I know where all the different, like if I know that I'm going to write 70,000 words, I've got all the different word counts. Basically, this is where this is supposed to happen. There's supposed to be the dark moment there, and there's supposed to be this, so that when I have that idea, I know exactly where to drop that into the chapter or the scene, and that way I can write in circles. But it doesn't address the fact that, when I got to the end of Mother Teresa's Advice for Jilted Lovers, there was no ending. Like,
endings are overrated.
And thanks for coming.
And and the end. So anyway, but that's certainly a tool that helps me is having taken all of those different structures and then writing into the structure that way.
There's another book that I've got called Story Grid. It's similar. It's they're all when things should happen, and I like Story Grid talks about, they actually go through Silence of the Lambs. They go through that story and kind of break it down. But I was going to say, just sort of the pantser outliner plotter kind of thing. The first novel that I did, the ballet novel, it probably took me 10 years to do it. And because I was trying to figure out the right way of doing it. Should I outline? Should I do it? I would write and then I'd edit and anyway, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Not like I do now. But and then I went to, it was at Surrey, and I was in a session, and it was Ivan Coyote was doing a session, and he was talking about nano, and I'd heard about it, but I didn't know anything about it, and he said he wrote his first book and basically did a spell check, and got published. And so I thought, well, I could do it.
I can run spell check.
I can run spell check. And I looked at my schedule, and I could actually, there's no cost to doing nano. And I started off with a brief character sketch, and I wrote 50,000 words, and I got Brenda Cox to do it as well, begrudgingly, but I got her to do it. But the ability to write that many words in a month really changed my writing, right? Even though it was just right by the seat of the pants, it changed my writing that I could actually write that much. Whereas the first one, I thought I only had this one novel, and that's all I could do. But I like the idea, and I talked to another writer at a writer's conference, and he says he has an idea. He starts off by seat of the pants. He writes to about 3/4, he kind of knows where it's going to end. And then he does a reverse outline, kind of like the synopsis, to make sure that he's going in the right direction. So I'm kind of adopting that kind of method. So I don't really start with a deep outline. I got to write to it, but then I can go back and then make the changes in the synopsis.
Yeah, I think it's so important to see that outline as a living document. Like it's something that's going to change. And I know that, like when I initially set it up, and Donna, I've done a similar thing. I don't use Scrivener as much as I used to, but for a while I was a big Scrivener user, and I had it set up with the Michael Hague 6-step story structure. And but I need to write linearly. Like I can't, when you talk about jumping around, that just gives me hives. But for me, just to even have those points and to think through, okay, what's my inciting incidents? What's the change of plans? What's the, point of no return? What's happening in all these steps just sort of gives me a place to go. But then as I'm writing, I'm discovering things, and I suddenly realize, again, in the book I just turned in, I was 3/4 of the way through the book where I had this epiphany that a character in the book, Alex, wasn't gay. It came as a surprise to me, and I suspect a surprise to Alex as well. That I suddenly realized the stakes would be so much higher if he and the main character had a romantic interest, as well as a friendship. Like it just changed everything. So, for me, there was a point where, I drew the dotted line in the manuscript and put in the margin, like from this point on, Alex is straight. And then I had to go out and, change his love of musical theater and various things, and, an affair that he had with someone else, to change it all around and shift that to a romantic relationship. So big changes can happen and are really appropriate to happen. And you figure that out fundamentally as you go, where you realize, and again, kind of going back to, I think, the importance of backstory, you realize, oh, there's this thing in my character's past, and that's why they're making these decisions or making these not great decisions. And so I need to shift that around. So seeing it as a living document is so important, and will make a huge difference, I think, in the writing. But going back to something you said, Tony, about nano, I was going to put a plug in for Donna's office hours, because one of the things that she's tackling quite a bit is that internal editor, and how do you shut that thing up? Because there's a time to turn her on, and there's a time to have that really in-depth discussion. But I see so many people, and I did it myself, start books and then stop. And it's because, it's not as good as it was inside my head. Like the idea that I had was awesome. And then I started writing it and it was total crap. So I obviously have the wrong idea. And then they start another book, and they, kind of go through that process. And I must have had at least a dozen starts of various things. And sometimes there would only be a couple pages. Sometimes there were, a few chapters, and sometimes there were hundreds of pages before I would suddenly just drop it. But then I would abandon the idea. And that was because it was too much reliance on the internal editor at a time when I needed her to shut up. So nano, I think, is one of those great ways that people sometimes just push through it because the pressure is just on to write. I've always been fairly lucky in terms of sitting down and writing pages, usually not too hard for me. I'm generally fairly disciplined about that part of it, but it's going back and not going back and rewriting the same pages over and over again. So just acknowledging that I just need to keep moving forward.
Right.
Versus going back. So kind of going back to the very beginning when I said, when the question was, someone had said, how do you know when you're done? For me, when I'm finally done is either A, it's my deadline and the book is due. That's a good prompter.
Right.
But secondly is I ask myself, like, am I just at this point rearranging deck chairs? So that becomes where I'm going back and I'm like, is it that she walked into the room or did she stride into the room? That she strode into the room. No, she walked into the room. Like, and
right.
I'm, when I'm getting to that level of kinds of nitpicky, tiny little things is when I know I need to let it out of my hands. I'm not fundamentally making shifts in the story anymore.
Right.
And that may be a time to go through. I'm totally fascinated by this pro writing aid, and I'm gonna look this baby up when we get off the phone today and check into it.
And I was interested because it did work with Scrivener, and so I don't have to copy it in. I don't have to. I've done other things. I've copied one book. I copied and pasted into Word. I'd use Word's grammar tools and then copy it back into Scrivener, which is a huge pain in the ass.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're always looking to sort of simplify your process, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to just be writing.
Yeah.
And that's why, I've had some people say they really want to like Scrivener and they just can't get it to work and they feel so it's like, if it's not working, use whatever is working.
Right.
And, if you like Scrivener, then use Scrivener because it's got some great tool sets to it. And that may be something for us, Donna, to look at a masterclass on at some point would be using Scrivener and some of that. Because I know for a lot of people that there's an intimidation factor if you're not technically comfortable.
Right. True.
I did with Scrivener, and so I'm a technical guy, but I was able to go in and add an extra field per scene that I added a tension level. There's an arbitrary, 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever the number was. But then I extracted the scene name and the tension level, and then I plotted it in Excel, and I showed the rising action. But it was actually interesting. It was interesting to see, and actually, I've got a blog post on exactly how I did it because it's actually not that difficult to do. But I was trying to go.
Share that in River.
I will.
Because
I
I think that would be one. I'm laughing because Excel scares me. Like I spent forever doing the thing, and my husband actually came in and he was like, "You're still adding that up with the calculator, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Just use Excel." Like I'm like, "I can't." So I'm impressed.
Yeah, I did a blog post on it, so I'll share that with the group.
That would be great. That would be fantastic. Well, I know, Tony, you have to go.
I have to go as well. I have so.
Well, that seems like a natural place for us to sort of go. I want to thank both of you for showing up so I wasn't all by myself, talking to myself for my very first office hours, which I would have done. It just would have been a lot shorter because I'm far less interesting on my own. So you're next up when, Donna?
Thank you. Tonight
Tonight
at 6:30.
Yeah. And Donna, where are you located?
I'm in Britannia Beach, just south of Squamish.
Okay. I'm in Vancouver too.
So for anyone else who might be watching, Squamish is halfway between Whistler and Vancouver, British Columbia. So
yes, because we have a few people. I know Cynthia is going to join us, and she's coming in from Belgium. So I'm not sure which office hours are going to make this most sense for her, but she will be joining in. So we will do that. So you're up, and then Crystal is on Wednesday evening.
Okay.
So that will be good. And she's doing
publishing, self-publishing, and
she's a guru in that area. And you will definitely want to make sure you get her masterclass on your schedule because it's going to be planning all the things.
Oh, so I figured out. So to add your calendar item to my work calendar, you go in and then you can add a guest to your meeting.
Okay.
And then I added my work email, which then it shows up on my work calendar, which is the font of everything I do. So, But that was the easiest way to do that. I can just go
Okay.
add my work email, and then it shows up there. So
All right, we will keep track in case other people have that same
Mhm.
issue, which
Sharing that.
they probably will.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have
Thank
a
you.
Nice to meet you, Tony.
Okay,
Bye.
nice to meet you. Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye. Bye.
I am going to stop recording.